everybody. In today's video, I'm going to be showing you one of my favorite designs that I have kind of been thinking about so far. I've got a few more spots left open at the end of the month, but this one is so cool. It is a Mona Lisa. So I like to every once in a while replicate a classic work of art. I've never done the Mona Lisa before, so when I decided to do this one, I was really excited about it because, like I said, I like to replicate things like that. So mostly just her face. It's kind of a close-up version of the Mona Lisa. And then if you go into the darkness, you get to see a skull. It's a skull, and then it goes a little bit of the collarbone and just a touch of the rib cage and like the sternum. So cool. I love this one. When you look at it in the bright light, you would never think that there was a glowing skull underneath. So that transition is super dramatic. I am so impressed with the way that it turned out. I love it. I hope you guys like it as much as I do, and don't forget to click subscribe to see all my future videos as well.
So we are going to begin by just taking a background color. This is a slightly teal toned gray, and then I'm going to just kind of work on getting some of those background shapes and some of that background in behind her. Like I've said in the intro, this is mainly a focus right on her face, and so there's not a whole lot that needs to be done in the background, but just do a little bit so it's not a solid color, because there's a lot of detail that goes into this painting. Then I'm going to take a very pale tan, and I'm going to just sort of find the basic shape of her face. I'm going to kind of just paint it in. It doesn't have to be perfect. Think of it as sketching. You're just kind of slowly working in and finding these various shapes. After I have one coat of that tan, I did add a second one so that it was a little bit more opaque, so it didn't show so much of the background through. And now using a couple different shades of like oranges and like a goldenrod color, I'm going to be doing a little bit more of the detailing in the background. However, most of this will actually be covered up by her hair, so even though I felt I needed to just kind of add a little bit more to the background, for the most part, it's unnecessary because it will just be completely covered up. We're going to add just a little bit more, just to, might as well have as much detail in there as possible. Adding a little bit of shading to the background pieces, a little bit of highlighting, just kind of going through, mixing colors as I go. Whenever I'm painting something like this, I have a selection of base colors that I have picked out, and then I will go through and I will mix them constantly. So I'll add a little bit of black, a little bit of white, maybe mix some yellow into the orange, and just kind of mix as I go so that I have a whole bunch of little micro shades to play with and to add here and there. I'm going to take a peacher tone than what I originally used from the Mona Lisa's face, and I'm going to start warming up her complexion. So her face and her neck, she's got some areas that are very flushed looking, very, very pinky peach color. And I didn't want to go right in with that color from the beginning because I didn't want her to look like she's just very red or orange. So I wanted to do that first base light color and then slowly add more and more of that peach tone to bring that warmth in. Using some browns, I'm going to be doing some of the shading on her face. Whenever you're doing shading that is a shadow, you want to use a gray tone. You don't want to use a rich red brown or something. You want to use something that has a lot of just gray in it. It can have some brown, or it should have some brown in it, but you don't want to just go right in with a very rich warm tone. You want it to be cool toned. So when you're picking your brown, if you have a tan color, you can simply mix in a little bit of brown to get that gray brown color that you're looking for. If you don't want to do that much mixing and you do want to grab some different shading colors, just make sure that when you're looking at them, you are picking ones that have that gray base to them. I'm going to go through and I'm just going to start finding some of the shading on her face. She looks so dramatic right here. Just the way that her eyes look at this particular face looks like she's got some really dramatic makeup on, not just the way that it's shading that's naturally occurring. Cracks me up, just this particular face looks like she's got some pretty wicked eyeshadow. We're going to just keep adding all of these different little bits, all this different shading, go through and do light, dark, alternating so that you can find shading, find the highlights, bring in some more of that warmth when you need to, and constantly refer back to your reference photo. That's the thing that I always like to reiterate in my videos, is that there's absolutely no shame in using a reference photo. If you're going to try to copy something, especially if it's something as well known and public as the Mona Lisa, I would be embarrassed to not use a reference photo. Not necessarily embarrassed, but it's available to you. Absolutely, go use it. There's some people that have said that I've read, different posts and stuff from people that say if you use a reference photo that, you're not really the artist because it's not coming from you. I think that is the most ridiculous statement. I've always thought that is a ridiculous statement. I love reference photos. I'd be lost without them. grab some reference photos, grab multiple pictures of the Mona Lisa if you want a close up on her eyes or something, get an overall picture, then get some close ones. That can be super helpful to you as well. So after we've got some of that first light shading done, then very dramatic painting. Grab almost black, a brown that is just a shy touch away from black, and you're going to be adding even more depth and even more shading. But the same thing, blend it out. After you've got the colors down, maybe take and soften them a little bit. Just keep looking back and forth from your reference photo, adding more details, adding more shading. The great thing with this particular painting is because of its age and its color tones, it's faded. It's a very, very old painting. It is not what it originally was. I've seen some of the predictions or some of the guesses of what the Mona Lisa would have looked like when it was just freshly painted, and it is so vibrant and it's so different now. But the good thing in this replication stage of the fact that it is a little bit softer looking than it used to be, is that the color variances that you have to go and you have to pick are a little bit smaller. So it's not quite as broad as it would have been one day long ago. So you can just kind of grab a few different shades of that, of a tan, and then some black and white, and you have a lot of different varieties to work with within that. I'm going to add a little bit more peach tones to her lips specifically. They need a lot more shading on them, but just kind of get that first base color down. Add a little bit more of those peachy tones to her cheeks. Like I said, she looks a little flushed, so you want to make sure that there's a little bit more color focused on her cheeks, her forehead, and then on her neck. A little bit of brightness on her chin, maybe. And then I'm going to be painting in her eyes. So go with straight white to do the actual eye. And then after you have that done, you darken it a little, add some gray to it, add some highlights to her nose, take that white and just plop a little bit of it down here and there. When you're painting with gel paint or gel polish, when you're doing details like this that aren't precise, but it's more of soft shading, soft highlights, use gel polish instead of gel paint. And then when you tap it out with your brush, it'll blend in so smoothly, so easily. And you don't have to worry about those teeny tiny little brush strokes. As soon as you apply a top coat, those will all blend together and smooth out, and it'll look absolutely gorgeous. For anything that you want to have precise lines, like the color in her eyes, her lash line, anything that you really need to have that very specific line on, then you're going to want to use a gel paint. Gel polish self levels. So after you apply it, especially, to a full nail, it doesn't leave the brush strokes. It kind of smooths itself out, which is what you want when you have a gel polish, because if you're painting a whole nail, you want it to have that ability to smooth itself out. However, a gel paint doesn't do that. So whatever you paint is how it's going to stay. At least that's how they're supposed to be. I'm sure there are brands out there that don't follow what I consider to be the polish versus paint rules, but normally a gel paint is going to keep those precise little lines that you paint. And so if you want something that has that precision, you want to make sure you're using a gel paint. But again, for something that you want it to be softer, you want it to smooth itself out a little bit, you want it to not have any brush strokes left over like somebody's complexion, then you're going to want to try to use a gel polish. I do a lot of times mix and tint my gel polish with a little bit of gel paint, and then you have the best of both worlds in a way, and you can get a little bit more precision, but it also blends out. That's another great option if you need to darken or lighten a color by adding a little bit of black or white gel paint into your gel polish. But whenever you're painting something like this, I use both. That's kind of my go-to. And if you're interested about any of the colors that I am using, they are all from Madam Glam. I have the entire list of colors that I used in the description box below. It is a long list, and but a lot of them are actually pretty current. They're from the last few months, and so they should be pretty easy to find on their website. But like I said, all color names are in the description box below, as well as a discount code. So I'm just going to keep adding more and more detail. As I've said in this video, keep looking back at your reference photo. You will see more and more details. One thing I like to do when I'm painting something like this that's as detailed and specific as this, because you're trying to replicate something that is well known and there's very little room for creative decisions, unless you want there to be. But for me, in my mode that I was painting here, I wanted it to be exactly, as close to exactly as the Mona Lisa as I could get it. I will zoom in, so I'll have my reference photo, and I will blow it up on a very small portion of the photo. So if I am working on her eyes, I will make it so the only thing on my screen, my reference photo screen, I use my phone typically, is the Mona Lisa's eyes. That way you don't get distracted by, oh my goodness, hey, look, her lips are a little different than what I have, and go back and fix that. You can laser focus your attention to one specific feature, which can be really helpful because it makes it so it's harder to miss something if you're really just focusing on a certain specific thing. The other thing that's good when you're doing that is that you can see things more because it's zoomed in and it's close. You don't miss something as easily because it's bigger, it's clearer, it's easier to see. So when you're painting something like this and you want that to, that laser focus, definitely zoom in on it. But then as you go through and you're painting bigger details, like when I just added her hair, which by the way was brown gel paint for anybody that's keeping track, Madame Glam's brown gel paint. The thing that I did for that is I zoomed out so I could see a bigger space and then look at where her hair falls. Does the curl on the side of her face that's kind of overlapping, does it go right along her jawline? Does it go straight? How does it fall? And you can get a lot more details and ask yourself these questions. And then on the other side, does it overlap her cheek at all? Which in this case, it does not. What is the shape of her hairline? Is it fairly straight across? Is it a sweetheart neckline? Does she have a widow's peak? Don't just assume you know these answers. Make sure that you are looking at your photo, getting the proper information from what is available to you, and then applying it. The more you question yourself, the more you question what you're seeing, the more you can figure out what to ask, the more precise, the more exact your painting will be. And then the same thing, after you paint the hairline, go back and look at your picture and say, is there shading on her face? Is there a shadow that fell on her face from her hair? Do I need to add more to that? In my case, that answer was a yes, I do need to add more to that. And just see what you can see. The more you ask yourselves these questions, the more exact your art will be, and the less stressful it'll be because you're not going at it and looking at it and thinking of this whole thing and being, oh my goodness, where do I begin? Because you just start somewhere and you figure out where to begin, and then you keep adding pieces to the puzzle. So when you're doing this, as you saw, I didn't even start her hair until her face was close to complete because I didn't want to have the distraction of worrying about her hair. I wanted to just worry about her face. And just slowly allow yourself to figure it out as you go. And then with her hair, after you have the general shape of it, go through, blow it up. Are the curls ringlets? Do they have a spiral to them? If they do have a spiral, how does the light play off of them? Does it just look like little lines going down? That's how my daughter's spirals look when they're all curly cued. The light just hits them and it looks like a little ladder going down. Is that how her hair looks? And then the one thing about the Mona Lisa that is interesting is she has a veil. She's wearing a veil, so we're going to be adding that gray to the back of her head. That's her veil, and it comes down over her shoulder. And then there's a sheer part of the veil that actually goes all the way up over the top portion of her hairline. And it falls over her forehead. And there's this tiny little line that goes right across. There's the edge of that sheer piece. So I'm going to be painting that line with the same gray. The gray that I'm using for this is one that isn't super opaque, which works perfectly in this scenario. And then I'm going to add a little bit of a white line to highlight the edge of that veil, and then a little bit of a black line to add a tiny bit of shading, just like so. As you are continuing to add these details, if you reach the point where you're like, you know what, I am getting really happy with this. I love the way this looks, but you're not certain, you're like, I really like it, but am I done? Put it to the side, set it to the side, do something else, and then come back. However, once you are happy with it and it's all cured, then you're going to mix some glow-in-the-dark pigment or glow-in-the-dark gel polish if you have just a clear glow-in-the-dark polish, and you're going to be starting to paint on her skull. It is so scary, actually, to just have this, portrait that you've spent hours on, and then I'm just going to plop some glow-in-the-dark stuff on top of this. Very nerve-wracking. So worth it in the end. And you're going to very carefully start painting just where her skull would be. Use her facial features as your guide. It is a little bit difficult because it's hard to see. When it's bright light, you cannot see it. So I use my Flash Cure flashlight frequently because that will illuminate the glowing pigment so that I can see it better. And then after I have a pretty good base, or what I consider to be a pretty good base painted on for the skull, I fully cured it, which is duly beneficial because it will really charge up the pigment when it's fully curing, and it also needed to be fully cured. After that was done, and after I did fully cure it that time around, then I decided to do something a little bit different. I I finished painting my little glow in the dark portrait of the Mona Lisa in dim lighting. And so you'll really see the difference once we go and we can see that. At first, I was going to try to paint an individual teeth on the skull. Eventually, I just gave up on that process and I just filled it in. I'm going to add a little bit of her spinal column to start with, going down, and then adding in some of those ribs. You're basically painting blind, so you have to kind of make guesses in this first beginning part of it. But then after you have that, and you're in the dim lighting, you can see where you've painted so far and you can add more details to it. The more layers of the glow-in-the-dark pigment that you apply, the brighter it will be. So the more coats you do over each section, the more pulled forward those are going to be. So when you're looking at a skull, look at what seems to be closest to you, what's pulled forward. Brow bone, the top of the nasal cavity, the cheekbones, right along the bottom of the jaw. Highlight some of those with more layers of the glow-in-the-dark pigment. Same thing with like down lower on her, and then cure it again, look at it again in the dim lighting, see if anything needs to be brightened up. Don't be afraid to do a couple different coats of the glow-in-the-dark pigment. Slowly work on building those colors in. Don't try to rush the process. And also, after it has been cured, look at it in the light to make sure it's not getting too much where it's going to make it so that you can't see the Mona Lisa anymore when it's in the daylight. Once you're done with your glowing, you're done with the background painting, everything is ready to go. Apply a layer of matte top coat, and this one is done. I absolutely love this nail. It is so incredible, the transition from, the bright light to dim lighting to dark light. It's very dramatic, and it is so surprising because you really can't see it in the light at all. I hope you guys like it as much as I do, and don't forget to click subscribe to see all my future videos and my new Halloween videos as well.